Jangan terlalu kecil, agak sini dikit. Halangin dia, pemandangan. Halangin pemandangan katanya.
We're going to get started in a minute, so if people can come in and take a seat, that'd be great. There's still plenty of seats right up front here, if people are interested in coming in. Come on in, there's seats in the front.
Permita, do you have any seat on the front? Two staff, there are still seats on the front.
Yeah, please come on in. Front row is the best seat. Okay. Yeah, everybody okay? Translators are ready to go? All right. Okay. Good morning, and welcome to the launch of the Human Rights Watch World Report 2023, covering all the human rights events of 2022. It's a pleasure to be with you all here in Jakarta, and I want to thank you for coming today. Before we get started, let me say that for those here in the room, we have English and Bahasa Indonesia translation available, and you'll need a headset that you should have received when you arrived. If you don't have one and need one, please contact one of the staff in the back of the room. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm the Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch. And here's the World Report that we're launching this morning. There are a limited number of hard copies in the back of the room at the registration table where you came in. I should note that the full report is also available for download for free at our website, hrw.org. Human Rights Watch also has a video available there, which we will see in a moment, and country-specific press releases for many of the over 100 countries that we work in around the world. So if you're interested in what's happening in a particular country, in Asia, or everywhere else in the world, it will be on our website. The press release here that we're distributing today is the global press release. Let me know if you need a copy, and we'd be happy to get me one. Let me also note at the outset that our report online is 712 pages, and that is the correct count for the number of pages. Our printing house here in Indonesia had a mind of its own in printing our hard copies in A4 size, which, frankly, looks very impressive, but it also resulted in a different page count in the hard copies that are here in the room. So for those who care about the number of pages and want to report that, it's 712 pages. And on the front cover, you'll see a photo of Ukrainian children in Mariupol with the word children handwritten in a sign on the card to try to keep them safe as they fled a war zone. That photo, in fact, is emblematic of how tough 2022 was when it comes to human rights issues. But there was good news and progress as well, and we'll get to that momentarily. Joining us today as speakers, we have Elaine Pearson, to my immediate left, our Asia Director, who flew in from Sydney earlier this week. And, of course, Andreas Harsono, our Indonesia Senior Researcher, who many of you already know. The way that we will proceed today is first that we'll see a quick video featuring our acting Executive Director, Tirana Hassan, discussing the report. And then our speakers will give short statements, and then we will take questions. For those who are tuning in from afar, either via Zoom or the Facebook live stream on the Human Rights Watch Facebook page, you can type your questions into the chat boxes on the platform. If you do that, we request that you clearly include your name and your organizational affiliation. We will have our colleague Judy here monitoring those chat boxes, and she will relay the questions to me up here. And since this is a press conference, let me note that both in the room and actually online, we will give priority to questions from members of the media. Obviously, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the approximately 1 hour that we have allocated for this press conference. But let me also add that after the press conference is over, we will stick around and happy to take any one-on-one questions you have or do interviews as you like. So without further ado, let me turn it over to my colleague, Elaine Pearson. Oh, we're going to do the show the video first, and then Elaine will speak. Can we turn the lights back on, please? Okay. Now, without further ado, my colleague Elaine Pearson, the Asia Director of Human Rights Watch.
Selamat pagi, terima kasih, and thank you all for coming. Across the Asia region this past year, we have seen a frontal assault on human rights and severe aggression in many of the countries that we cover. Our World Report covers 20 countries from across the Asia-Pacific region, from Afghanistan all the way to Australia and Papua New Guinea. And there is a concerning sense of déjà vu about the lack of human rights progress in Asia. Once again, we see another member of the Marcos family win an election in the Philippines after a campaign of disinformation. The military junta in Myanmar, once again piling up trumped-up charges and convictions for political leader Aung San Suu Kyi and other political prisoners. Meanwhile, the military commits war crimes. The Taliban is again crushing the rights of women in Afghanistan. And this past August, the UN has said in a groundbreaking report that the serious abuses in China's Xinjiang region may amount to the most serious of human rights violations, crimes against humanity. Authoritarianism is rising, even in the countries that claim to be democracies, due to weak institutions prone to political capture. On freedom of expression, governments from Cambodia and Thailand to China and North Korea have used the pretext of COVID to restrict free speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, or freedom of movement. From India, Pakistan to Vietnam, authorities have choked civil society and prosecuted and imprisoned government critics. Here in Indonesia, the passage of a new criminal code with problematic provisions will chill free speech and permit selective enforcement, particularly troubling for minorities. Countries in our region, from Bangladesh, Pakistan to Vanuatu, are bearing the catastrophic effects of climate change, despite most countries in Asia not being the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And yet those who are peacefully defending the environment may find themselves imprisoned in countries that range from Australia to Vietnam, or worse, even killed in places like the Philippines. Yet courageous people, time and again, still take extraordinary risks to take to the streets, even in places like Afghanistan and China, to stand up for their rights. In Sri Lanka this year, we saw how people power ousted the Rajapaksas after years of misrule, impunity and corruption. Sadly, the new administration there has not improved human rights. In a step towards accountability, we saw China face scrutiny for the first time at the UN Human Rights Council with a narrowly defeated resolution to merely debate the UN's groundbreaking report on Xinjiang. A resolution like that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago of even being tabled. And I think it shows how some governments of the world are fed up with the lack of accountability, the obfuscation and the lies from the Chinese government about these abuses in Xinjiang. But some governments in our region defended China or tried to have it both ways. Malaysia abstained from the resolution. Indonesia said that we must not close our eyes to the plight of Uyghurs, and then shamefully joined Pakistan in voting against the resolution. And this is hypocritical. I mean, it's in stark contrast to Indonesia's position in pressing for more accountability at the international level for crimes against humanity like apartheid that are committed by Israeli authorities against Palestinians. We ended the year with the first ever UN Security Council resolution on Myanmar, which was a momentous step forward for the people of Myanmar. Even if it falls short of a UN arms embargo and more concrete measures, it's still a way of getting Myanmar onto the Council's agenda for further multilateral action. So while I can't cover all of the country situations in our region in this press conference today, I will just say a few words about some of the most troubling developments over the past year before turning to Indonesia's foreign policy and why we are holding this press conference here in Jakarta. So firstly, in China, I've said a few words already about the situation in Xinjiang, but we've also seen President Xi Jinping consolidate power with an unprecedented third term. A lone brave protester unfurled a banner on a bridge calling for an end to Xi's rule. And that set off a chain of protests by Chinese and Hong Kong students outside the country. We saw abusive lockdowns in China against hundreds of millions of people, which impacted their access to food, to medicine, to other necessities, and it led to extraordinary protests inside the country, despite the risk of near certain punishment. And in Hong Kong, the dismantling of democracy continued as journalists and activists were convicted of sedition and violating the national security law. In one of the most absurd Orwellian cases this year, 5 authors, who are in fact speech therapists, were sent to prison for sedition. Their crime? Publishing children's books about sheep trying to hold back wolves from their village, an allegory about Hong Kong and the Beijing government. As discomfort grows with China's repression and the retaliatory trade practices, many Western governments have sought to diversify their trade markets away from China and have particularly been on a charm offensive with the Indian government. But they should not overlook how India, under Prime Minister Modi, has also seen many similar abuses. The systematic discrimination against religious minorities, especially Muslims, the stifling of peaceful dissent, the use of technology to suppress free expression and tighten its grip on power. In Afghanistan, the Taliban unfortunately have been more interested in persecuting women and jailing journalists than in addressing Afghanistan's severe economic and humanitarian crisis. It's no longer possible in Afghanistan for girls to go to school past grade 6. Women are now even banned from working for NGOs. They were already banned from most government jobs, including teaching. And this will make it even harder for most urgent humanitarian assistance to be delivered. Muslim majority countries and democracies like Indonesia need to keep speaking up for women in Afghanistan and make it clear to Taliban authorities that at a bare minimum, they need to let women and girls learn, work, and move about freely. In Myanmar, well, it's been nearly 2 years since the coup, and the junta continues to commit crimes against humanity and war crimes with impunity, jeopardizing the lives and freedoms of millions of people of Myanmar and posing a threat to the entire region. Myanmar's security forces have arbitrarily arrested more than 16,000, killed at least 2,300 since the coup, according to the NGO Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. And they even brought back the death penalty last year for the first time in more than 3 decades. But ending Myanmar's litany of abuses requires action, not just words. Which brings us to Indonesia and why we are holding this press conference here in Jakarta. As you saw in the video, the theme of this year's World Report is really about presenting a new model for global leadership in the world, and that all governments, big and small, have a responsibility to stand up and protect rights both within and across country borders. This is an opportunity for Indonesia to step up. We see Indonesia keen to play a greater role in world affairs, successfully chairing the G20 last year, and this year we urge Indonesia to use the ASEAN chairmanship effectively to resolve the crisis in Myanmar. The world's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine shows what is possible when governments work together. But the people of Afghanistan and Myanmar quite rightly ask, where was the international community's conscience when their daily lives were shattered and their democratically elected governments overthrown? As chair of ASEAN, Indonesia should take steps to hold the Myanmar junta to account for its failure to implement the 5-point consensus, which was agreed in April 2021. Over the past 20 months, the junta's stubborn resistance to implementing the 5-point consensus really puts ASEAN's credibility on the line. Rather than halting attacks, as called for in the 5PC, the junta has merely ramped up its abuses. Last October, ASEAN agreed to set clear benchmarks for implementation of the 5-point consensus and said that foreign ministers will monitor progress. Indonesia, as ASEAN chair, should take the lead in a review of the Myanmar junta's lack of compliance with the 5-point consensus. Now, this is consistent with Article 20 of the ASEAN Charter, and ASEAN should consider suspending Myanmar for its repeated failure to uphold the bloc's commitment to a people-oriented, people-centred ASEAN. This year will be critical, as the Myanmar junta says that they will hold sham elections, and ASEAN should give no legitimacy to this charade. Instead, Indonesia should be working with a smaller group of like-minded governments to take concrete measures to stop the junta from violating the rights of its citizens, and tell the junta that there will be no support for any elections until all political prisoners are freed and there is a genuine commitment to restore the democratically elected government. Inaction not only prolongs the suffering of people from Myanmar, but it also affects other ASEAN nations. In recent weeks, we've all seen the boats of Rohingya refugees that have washed up on the shores of Indonesia's Aceh province or pushed back from Thailand and Malaysia. A regional solution that holds the junta accountable is the only long-term solution. Most Rohingya want to go home, but they want safety, they want equal treatment, they want their land back, and they want the perpetrators of ethnic cleansing and acts of genocide held to account. My colleagues will have more to say on Indonesia's domestic situation, and particularly the comments yesterday by President Jokowi acknowledging past abuses, which was a significant step. But what we need now going forward is proper accountability for the victims of those abuses, and a genuine commitment going forward to safeguarding human rights for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Now we're going to turn the floor over to our senior researcher for Indonesia, Andreas Harsono, who's going to speak about the situation in Indonesia.
Terima kasih, Kun Phil. These are the summary of what happened last year in Indonesia. Of course, Indonesia was in the spotlight during last year, hosting the G20 summit in Bali, amid international tension caused by the war in Ukraine and also friction between the US and China. Last year, the Indonesian government frequently violated basic civil and political rights, especially of minorities based on religion, ethnic, social, gender, and sexual orientation grounds. Military and police abuse rights across the country with impunity, especially in Papua and West Papua provinces, where diplomats, foreign rights monitors, and international media are largely excluded. Last month, the Indonesian parliament passed a new criminal code containing provisions that seriously violate international human rights law and standard. Articles in the new law violate the rights of women, religious minorities, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, and undermine rights to freedom of speech and association, including, of course, press freedom. The law making consensual sex outside of marriage a criminal offense is a full-scale assault against the right to privacy, permitting intrusion into the most intimate decision of individuals and families. Indonesia, you might know that, has millions of couples without marriage certificate who will be theoretically breaking the law, especially among indigenous people or Muslims in rural areas who married only using Islamic ceremonies called kawin sirih. While the crimes of sex or cohabitation outside marriage can only be prosecuted on the complaint of the husband, wife, parents, or children of the accused, it will disproportionately impact women and LGBT people who are more likely to be reported by husband for adultery or by families for relationship they disapprove of. Of course, until now, same-sex couple cannot marry in Indonesia, so this clause in the new criminal code also effectively renders all same-sex conduct illegal. This is the first time in Indonesia history that adult consensual same-sex conduct had been proscribed by law. Articles in the law also maintain the criminalization of abortion, with some exception. Such provision violate women's and girls' rights to comprehensive and inclusive sexual and reproductive health education and information. They also negatively impact women's and girls' ability to protect their health, make informed choices about their bodies and having children, and can lead to unwanted pregnancy, which can affect a range of rights, including ending a girl education, pendidikan buat anak perempuan, contributing to child marriage, as well as putting women and girls' health and life at risk. The new criminal code also increase the blasphemy part from 1 to 6 article, albeit with a shorter jail term, providing a maximum 3 years for blasphemy, and for the first time include an article outlawing leaving a religion or a belief as apostasy. This new criminal code bucked a global trend to either not enforce blasphemy laws or to scrap them altogether. The new law also provides that the government will recognize, quote, any living law, unquote, in the country, which is likely to be interpreted, extend formal legality to hundreds, more than 700 Sharia-inspired regulations imposed by local officials in areas across the country. Many of these regulations discriminate against women and girls, such as hijab dress code, mandatory jilbab dress code, female genital mutilation, and many other regulations that discriminate against LGBT people. The report also revealed that the Indonesian government is failing to protect the rights of communities living on near land allotted to companies' commercial agriculture, palm oil mostly. Human Rights Watch documented the upheaval brought on affected communities by long-running conflict between companies and rural communities, and the Indonesian government failure to protect the rights of these communities, mostly on the outer island, and ensure they have access to land to sustain their livelihood. Papua is still a problem. It is still restricted for international monitors. There was a rarely used human rights trial against a surgeon over the killing of 4 indigenous Papuan teenagers last year, but that particular surgeon was acquitted. Expressing views in support of Papuan self-determination continues to be severely restricted and punished in West Papua and other parts of Indonesia. Disability rights. In Indonesia, people with real or perceived psychological disabilities continue to be shackled, chained, or locked in confined spaces. It is called pasung in Bahasa Indonesia, due to social stigma as well as inadequate support and mental health services in Indonesia. The UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities expressed grave concern over the ongoing pasung practices in Indonesia. Last but not the least, Indonesia is one of the world's top 10 emitters of greenhouse gases. It is contributing to the climate crisis, taking a mounting toll on human rights around the globe. Estimates by Global Forest Watch indicate a downward trend in forest loss in 2021, the most recent available data, despite the government ban on primary forest clearing since 2011. The latest data indicates Indonesia lost 203,000 hectares of primary forests by 2021. Thank you, Phil.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Andreas. So now we're going to turn to questions. As I mentioned at the outset, we are going to give priority to questions from the media. I'm going to start here in the room with questions here. I believe we have some microphones available for people to ask questions. If you have a question, please indicate your name, your media affiliation, and which of the panelists you are actually directing the question to, so that we're able to respond as quickly and effectively as possible. So the floor is open now. Please put your hand up and indicate if you'd like to ask questions.
It is fine in Bahasa Indonesia also.
Please go ahead. Yep. Do we have a microphone for him? Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih. Oke. Selamat siang. Saya Mahdi, jurnalis dari Desk International Harian Kompas. Saya ingin menanyakan mungkin mengenai Myanmar. Kemarin Menteri Luar Negeri itu menyatakan dalam pernyataan pers tahunannya bahwa Indonesia akan mencoba bersikap tegas terhadap pemerintah Myanmar dengan menuntut janji pelaksanaan 5 poin konsensus seperti itu. Tapi sejauh ini yang kami lihat sepertinya memang ada perpecahan di antara negara-negara anggota ASEAN sendiri. Tadi Miss Elaine juga sempat menyatakan bahwa Indonesia harus bekerja dengan sejumlah pemerintah mungkin kecil ya, artinya yang sejalan dengan Indonesia, Malaysia mungkin seperti itu, atau Brunei dan seperti itu. Tapi apakah menurut Human Rights Watch langkah-langkah itu cukup untuk untuk paling tidak mengakhiri kekuasaan junta di Myanmar? Karena menurut saya juga sejauh ini tidak ada special envoy yang memang diminta khusus untuk menangani masalah Myanmar. Jadi saya ingin minta pendapat dari panelis di depan. Terima kasih.
Okay, we'll turn it over to Elaine.
Yeah, I'll start and feel free to add anything on. But yes, I mean, I think we met earlier with the Indonesian government this week, and we hope that the special envoy will be appointed without delay. I know there was a press conference yesterday saying that the office of the special envoy will be overseen by the foreign minister. But there's no time to waste. I mean, the 5-point consensus was agreed in April 2021, and since then the situation has only deteriorated. So this is not just up to ASEAN. I mean, I think it was real progress, actually, that we saw the UN Security Council adopt, for the first time, a new resolution. And it's not easy, as we know, to get a UN Security Council resolution when countries are able to veto it, like China and Russia. So I think that shows that amongst the international community, there is real growing concern about the failure of the existing measures to hold the junta to account. A number of Western governments have imposed concrete measures, targeted sanctions against Myanmar generals and against Myanmar-owned, military-owned enterprises. But those sanctions will only be effective if they're broader and if other governments also commit to enforcing those sanctions. So, we need more targeted sanctions. We need to cut off the supply of revenue to the junta. We also need to cut off the supply of weapons to the junta. We need a UN arms embargo. Sadly, that was not included in the resolution. But, as far as ASEAN is concerned, the principle of ASEAN centrality can't simply be an excuse for the Myanmar junta to continue to, supposedly engage with envoys and receive guests, but make zero progress on the 5-point consensus. So now is really the time for action. And so it is up to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, the countries that have been speaking out more about this crisis, to work together and take some real concrete steps. Jakarta is the first stop on my visit of Southeast Asia. I will subsequently be meeting with officials in Singapore, in Kuala Lumpur, and also in Bangkok, because all of these countries are really key, I think, and need to take more concrete action if this crisis is going to be resolved. Phil, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I would just add the principle of ASEAN centrality, which has been continually brought out by the European Union, by the United States, Canada, and others, also presumes that ASEAN can reach a consensus. And right now, ASEAN is really split right down the middle. With the Mekong countries being much more aligned with the military junta in Myanmar versus the maritime countries led by Indonesia, which are seeking more pressure. It was very disconcerting several weeks ago to see the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Thailand invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Myanmar to a meeting which other foreign ministers from Laos and Cambodia and the Deputy Foreign Minister of Vietnam attended. That kind of undermines the effort to put more pressure on Myanmar, and it sends the wrong signal. And so I think it's very important for countries like the United States, the EU and its member states to really do a gut check with Thailand. What are you on about here in terms of the Myanmar junta and the policy towards Myanmar? Are you going to stand up for human rights? Are you going to stand up for democracy? We have several questions online. While the folks in the audience are considering their next questions, I'm going to read some of these which have been relayed to me. The first one from the Jakarta Post, which is heading towards Andreas. Yvette Tanamala of the Jang Post says, I'd like to ask a question about the key international actors section of the Indonesia's report. Under the section, 3 foreign affairs instances were mentioned. Jokowi's meeting with Putin last year, ASEAN's sluggish progress with the 5-point consensus, and Indonesia's vote against discussing Xinjiang. The Foreign Ministry has made clear their non-aligned free and active politics. They are willing to negotiate with all parties and reluctant to discuss issues they perceive to be political in nature, and that this is a reflection of that. How do you respond? How do geopolitics, rivalries, tensions complicate the collective effort to tackle human rights abuses? So, over to my colleagues.
Regarding Indonesia's vote on China that finally rejected a discussion, a deliberation of the UN Human Rights Report on Xinjiang, we were talking with the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about that. Of course, they repeated the same argument. First is that it was a politicization, especially by the US. They also responded that they have consulted Islamic organization inside Indonesia, especially the Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, on deciding about voting against the deliberation of the UN report. We raised our concern with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jakarta. We met them on Tuesday. We told them, look, there are also Muslim majority countries that voted for the deliberation, including Turkey, Albania, and some other OIC members, Organization of Islamic Countries, including Malaysia. They at least abstained. But Indonesia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia rejected the deliberation. We, just like what Elaine mentioned, but the vote was pretty narrow, and it was the first time ever that China was being debated with that narrow margin of rejection. Elaine, would you please?
Yeah, I'm happy to add a little bit to that. I mean, it is unfortunate to see, I think, the politicization of these issues. And I think one way to get around that politicization is to simply have a discussion at the UN Human Rights Council, which is the forum to discuss the most severe and most egregious human rights violations. And that's all the resolution was about. It was merely to table a debate and a discussion about the UN report. It wasn't to endorse the report in any way. And that is why I think it's just so disappointing that Indonesia voted against that resolution. I mean, if Indonesia has, a non-aligned foreign policy, then I think abstention would have been something that we certainly would have expected from Indonesia, and which was the response we saw from Malaysia. That said, I really think that failing to use the avenues of accountability that are there at the UN, like the Human Rights Council, to address these abuses will not help, actually, with the politicization of these issues. So if we really want to see progress, then we need to see it through forums like the UN Human Rights Council, where the members are voted on to the Council. And I think, we really want to see Indonesia, adopting a principled, consistent position when it comes to human rights. And so not only standing up, for the rights of Palestinians, or sometimes for the rights of the people of Myanmar in their support for the work on the Rohingya, but also, where crimes against humanity are being committed by more powerful actors and more powerful governments, like the Chinese government.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Seeing none, I've got another question from online. This is connected. This is from YT Mak of Radio France International, reporting from Hong Kong. They ask, may I know, it seems that China is leading countries from Asia and Africa, which human rights has been suppressed, to stand against the West. Do you agree with this observation? And if so, how would it affect the human rights situation in China, Hong Kong, as well as the world? And two, do you see a slowdown of the suppression of human rights in Hong Kong, since the leader both of China and Hong Kong stressed more on maintaining the international status of Hong Kong?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. Thank you for the question. I mean, yes, I think we are seeing a more assertive and aggressive foreign policy from China. China is, spreading foreign investment across many countries in Asia and Africa and the Pacific. That foreign investment is greatly welcomed by many of these governments. But China, in return, is also, expecting, some form of loyalty in terms of, votes at the Human Rights Council, silence on the human rights violations that are taking place inside China. And that clearly, isn't acceptable. We see many governments, still willing to criticize other powerful countries from whom they receive foreign investment and have significant trade ties. But when it comes to China, but precisely because of the Chinese government's unwillingness to accept any external criticism for its policies, the situation is quite different. But I think what we have seen at the international level is actually this growing coalition of governments that are now willing to speak up about the lack of accountability for abuses in Xinjiang. So the first time that there was a joint statement at the Human Rights Council on China, no government would actually read that statement. And it was only a dozen governments, mainly all Western governments. The last statement at the Human Rights Council, I believe it was 47 governments from every region around the world. So, I think the opposition and the concern about the lack of engagement and accountability of these issues is really growing. And I think that this is where we want to see broader-based coalitions, because I think that is where it will be most effective in holding the Chinese government to account for its abuses. Just having a look at the second part of the question. Do you see a slowdown of suppression in human rights in Hong Kong? Well, no. I think what we've seen is because of the impact of the national security law, we've seen convictions of journalists, of high-profile leaders and activists, people like Jimmy Lai, which has had a really chilling effect, frankly, on free speech and freedom of expression in Hong Kong, and so has really, neutered the democratic movement in Hong Kong. And that is really of concern. I mentioned one of the cases that, I think really just demonstrates the complete absurdity and complete intolerance for criticism. But, I think also what has happened in Hong Kong has really led to, an unusual sort of coalition of young protesters across countries in Asia who have expressed solidarity. They're known informally as the Milk Tea Alliance. But what we are seeing now is that, young protesters, whether it's in Thailand, whether it's in Myanmar or Cambodia, have also learned and gained courage and inspiration from the young protest leaders in Hong Kong. And so I think, that thirst and demand for change from young people is, probably the message of hope that I see from our World Report, because it shows that despite the immense crackdowns, despite all of the risks, that people are still yearning for change and are willing to take enormous risks in order to be a part of that change.
Okay. Questions in the room? Yes, please. Can someone provide a microphone, please? Kindly introduce yourself.
Associated Press.
Is that,
Check.
can you, is it,
So I think I'm going to back to the question about Myanmar, as you mentioned about the pressure to ASEAN, to Indonesia as the leader of ASEAN this year. So how optimistic that for you to see Indonesia will solve the problem in Myanmar? Do you think that Indonesia may rise the challenge to solve it or not? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I hope Indonesia will rise to the challenge, because I think, we're about to see the second anniversary of the military coup in Myanmar. And things have gotten worse, not better, in those past 2 years. So, I think ASEAN has been very patient with the junta. They have, exhausted, I think, a lot of the opportunities for dialogue. And instead, we've seen the junta really use that process of the 5-point consensus simply to kick the can down the road. And, they're hoping that the international community will lose interest. So in terms of, whether Indonesia will rise to the challenge, I certainly hope that they do. I think, we are looking to Indonesia for leadership at this time. We know that Indonesia, wants to be a respected voice in the international community as a Muslim-majority democracy. And we need countries like Indonesia to rise to that challenge and to play that role. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity this year as the chair of ASEAN to take that forward. Will it be easy? No, of course it will not. Not knowing, that, the governments that are within ASEAN, knowing, the principles of non-interference, knowing that there will be, and there has been a lot of pushback from Myanmar junta authorities. So to do this, I think it will require, really, a lot of attention from Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi and from the Indonesian government. And I really hope, for the sake of the people of Myanmar, that Indonesia does rise to that challenge.
okay, we have another question online. This is from Jodes Gavilan from Rappler in the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos has repeatedly said and assured international bodies that human rights is a priority under his administration. But as you've indicated in your report, there is still much to be done. In the list of things he should do, where should holding former President Rodrigo Duterte accountable and responsible for the massive killings under his watch be placed? Should this be a priority? What's the implication if this continues to be ignored?
Well, I'll have a go at answering that question. But Phil, I think since you supervise the Philippines, also please weigh in. I mean, I think, we have seen other crimes against humanity committed, within the ASEAN region. We talked a lot this morning about Myanmar, but also the killings of thousands of people in the Philippines under Duterte's war on drugs is also a crime against humanity. And there has been no accountability for that. I mean, we know that the International Criminal Court was so concerned about this that they opened an investigation into these killings. And that investigation has been allowed to proceed, even though Duterte tried to, withdraw from the Rome Statute. We know that that is still underway. So, if the Marcos government is actually serious about addressing human rights concerns, then there needs to be accountability for all of these extrajudicial killings that have occurred in the Philippines. And so, it's not going to be easy, but, I think that this does need to be a priority for the Marcos administration. Phil, do you want to? add something in?
It's a huge priority for the Marcos administration. This is the biggest issue in human rights in the Philippines. And what we have seen is literally a handful of cases where a prosecution has taken place. Despite claims from the Marcos administration that they care about this, in fact, they're not really doing anything to stop it. And the actual order which initiated the war on drugs is still in operation in the Philippines. So the reality is nothing has changed. There's been a change in tone. There's been greater effort at public relations by the Marcos administration. And so far, unfortunately, that's being rewarded by the international community that seems thrilled that Marcos is not Duterte, so therefore things must be better. We insist that there have to be real changes on the ground. There has to be accountability, there have to be investigations and prosecutions, not the sort of talking about an investigation, but a real investigation where accountability is guaranteed. There are other things that the Marcos administration they could do to prove they're serious about human rights, which they haven't done. They haven't appointed serious commissioners on the Commission on Human Rights. We have one chairperson and one commissioner. The rest of the seats are all still vacant. And the people who have been appointed so far don't really have, as far as we can see, much of a track record on human rights. We hope that they will do a good job, but we haven't seen anything yet. Former Senator Leila de Lima continues to be held on bogus charges. She's now more than 5 years in pretrial detention. The case against her should be dropped. She should be released tomorrow. And if the Marcos administration was serious about reversing some of the damage done to the human rights record of the Philippines by Duterte, they would do that. But they've done nothing. And so we're very disappointed with the situation in the Philippines. We're just not seeing any of the promises that Marcos is making about human rights being fulfilled. Questions in the room? Yes, please. Oh, well, we have people online though, so we need to ask you to use the microphone. Over here, yeah.
Mustafa Margadi, NOS News, Dutch Public Broadcasting. I think this question is going to be aimed at Andreas and Phil. We've touched upon the Rohingya situation. Could you explain to me why there's no cohesive plan from countries surrounding the Gulf of Bengal and the Andaman Sea to set up a search and rescue structure to save people who are there floating for a month, sometimes 40 days? And what role can Indonesia play as the head of ASEAN and the country that has been getting the bulk of the Rohingya these last 2 months? Thank you very much.
You know, it's shocking that now, almost 8 years after the 2015 boat people crisis, we still have Rohingya refugees in boats floating away on the high seas to their deaths. We just saw the UNHCR come out with a statement a week or so ago stating that they think that a boat with more than 180 people have been lost, have disappeared. You know, it's shocking that this is continuing to happen. And we continue to have both frontline states like Thailand and Malaysia actively pushing off boats, sending them back out to sea. Indonesia deserves credit for being willing to bring some of these boats ashore. I think it's the Achinese fishermen that actually should be awarded a gold medal for their humanitarian service to Rohingya refugees, because they're the front line and they're the people who are standing up for the principle of the law of the sea, that you have an obligation to help people in distress. And, this is a code that fishermen and others believe at sea. But, there needs to be some sort of concerted regional effort to change the policy. We raised this issue with other diplomats in Jakarta about, for instance, the Bali process, which is supposed to be dealing at a regional level with issues of trafficking and people's migration. And so far, nothing has happened there. So there's a call to try to revive that dialogue and make something happen. But more importantly, I think it's also critical that there has to be a recognition that these people are going to continue to come out until there's a solution for the problems that exist in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. As Elaine said very clearly, these Rohingya, they want to go home, but they want to return in dignity, with rights. They want their land back. They want to be protected. Of course, they faced crimes against humanity and acts of genocide when they were forced out of the country in 2017. They're not going to willingly go back into the clutches of the Myanmar military without some sort of protection. So they need to be protected. And Bangladesh has to recognize that they have to also be protected as well. And we're seeing more and more predations and problems for the Rohingya in the refugee camps. So with that kind of situation on the ground in both Myanmar and in the camps in Bangladesh, of course the boats are going to keep coming out. And there needs to be a serious response led by Indonesia as the ASEAN chair and as the co-chair of the Bali dialogue, the Bali process dialogue, to do something about it. We have a question here, another one online. This is from Swee Wee from the New York Times. You noted that President Jokowi's acknowledgement of gross human rights violations over the past decades was significant. Why do you say this is significant? Do you think the government would hold anyone accountable for the abuses and the victims to be given any restitution? Thank you.
I'll start, and then Andreas, I think you add some more. But I said it was a significant step forward, largely because for so many years in Indonesia, despite the record and the information about these abuses, we have seen complete denial. We've seen a wall of silence about these abuses and an unwillingness to acknowledge that they took place. But simply acknowledging and apologising for past abuses that occurred more than 20 years ago is not adequate. It's not sufficient. We need to see that there is genuine accountability taken. We want to see the perpetrators of these abuses prosecuted, and the victims of these abuses have suffered already for so many years. It's taken them such a long time. Why should they have to wait for 20 years to hear this apology from an Indonesian president? So this is really the first step. And Andreas, maybe you want to say a bit more about what should come next.
My first reaction when listening to President Jokowi's speech yesterday was, this is too little, too late. I'm not saying that this is wrong. I believe that this is the right step forward, but it is too little, too late. Why too little? President Jokowi mentioned 12 cases. If you take a look at the list, it includes 1965, a major mass killing in Indonesia, the mother of all mass violence in Indonesia. Kill at least between whatever version that you believe, 760,000, according to the Sukarno government, killed, or a military, an army general, 3 million killed. That is a major, major killing. But if you take a look at the remaining 11 cases, they happen one in Sumatra, Lampung, and then some in Papua, Wasior and Wamena, and Aceh. I said that it is too little because from Sabang to Merauke, from Aceh to Papua, there are mass killings. There are mass killings. President Jokowi did not mention Kalimantan, the killing of ethnic Chinese between 1967 until 1969. The killing of ethnic Maduris. At least 6,500 were killed between 1997 and 2001, beheaded. I tried to find ethnic Maduris to find the mass grave. Of those at least 6,500 killed, only one mass grave was found. Biak Massacre, 1998. Wamena Massacre, 1977. Ambon, between 1999 and 2004, 10,000 killed. Or Ternate Halmahera, 15,000 killed between 1999 and 2004. 15,000 killed. So it was too little. It was way too little. With the Maduris, my wife is ethnic Maduris from Pontianak. I know many of her friends, her relative. They still, they still don't know where their fathers are. Grandfathers, sons, mothers, grandmothers, where are they? Children. The Maduris, ethnic Maduris, are members of the Nahdlatul Ulama Muslim group. And the Nahdlatul Ulama Muslim, they don't celebrate birthdays, like me at least. They celebrate death days, the day when their loved one died. It is called Haul in Bahasa Indonesia. You might remember every December we celebrate Abdurrahman Wahid, the late President Haul. Big gathering. The Maduris do that. They celebrate Haul. How could they celebrate the Haul, the day of the death, when they don't know when their mothers died? Where did she die? Where do their parents die? So this is too little. And why I said that it is too late, the killing of the Maduris happened between 1997 until 2001. Why there is no documentation? The Acehnese, the Papuan, the Moluccan, the ethnic Chinese, there are no documentation. Why don't the government years ago, decades ago, did the documentation matching the DNA test of the skeleton and their surviving family members? It is too late, too little, it is too late. I was born in 1965. I am 58 years old now, and that is the year of living dangerously. So far, NGOs only found 30-something mass graves. In one particular mass grave near my hometown in Jember, they estimated 250 people were buried in that particular mass grave. But the government should do more than just saying that we apologize, or not even apology, we acknowledge the atrocities in 1965. But it is too little. It is too late. I hate just to mention President Jokowi because, of course, he is my age. He was not directly involved back in 1965. But there are many perpetrators, very old, still alive, and many of their descendants are still alive, in power. We, as a nation, do too little and too late. President Jokowi's statement should be a wake-up call for the leaders in Indonesia, politicians, parliament members, NGO leaders, opinion leaders, including journalists. Should be a wake-up call that we haven't done enough. It was too little, it was too late.
We have a number of different questions here. And one of them from John Macbeth of the Asia Times, following on that question, asked, why is the murder of Munir, why does that appear to be missing from the list of violations?
Well, I don't know. It's John Macbeth should ask President Jokowi himself why the murder of Indonesia leading human rights defender in 2004 was missing from the government report. But again, it reiterated my impression that it was too late, it was too little. There are so many people like Munir, local human rights defenders. The case of poet Wiji Tukul, missing in 1998, was probably covered in that apology because he was missing in between 1997 and 1998 with many other people who disappeared. But not only Munir. There are many other local human rights defenders in Aceh, in Papua. They went missing in Bia, in Kalimantan, in Sulawesi, Poso, North Sulawesi, Northern Molucas Island, Southern Molucas Island, East Timor. Don't forget East Timor. There are still many human rights defenders who went missing, despite being reported by the UN-sponsored CIGA report. Phil.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why do you think the statement came now?
I don't know. You should ask President Jokowi why it came out yesterday. I really don't know. It should be raised within the palace why President Jokowi did the ceremony yesterday at the palace. I really don't know.
Okay, we've got a number of other questions here. One from Jong Lee of Radio Free Asia's Seoul Bureau, who asks, it's been nearly 3 years since North Korea closed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. What would you say is the most worrisome aspect of border closure? And two, South Korea and the United States, like allies, cite human rights as their shared value. Do you think they're doing enough to improve and shed light on North Korea's human rights situation? And there was also an earlier question about South Korea. How do you evaluate the way, this is from Jamin Anderson from Radio Free Asia as well, how do you evaluate the way South Korea and the United States deal with North Korea's human rights issues, especially since South Korea's Yoon administration begun? And how should South Korea and the U.S. approach North Korea to improve human rights in 2023? Do you want me to take that? Okay. If we look at what has happened on COVID and the rights-violating aspects of the way governments have responded, North Korea is a case study of some of the worst practices. You had effective closure of the border. You had significant restrictions on freedom of movement within the country. An increased authoritative response to prevent people from crossing the border. And you also had restrictions on trade that created massive problems in terms of food security, medical supplies, other basic necessities for the North Korean people to live. Now that the border is starting to reopen, the situation is still very dire. People were making a lot of about prior to COVID, where these sort of gray markets, these informal markets, people were able to do trading, and this offered some greater local level freedoms for people. All that is gone. What we are seeing is the North Korean government trying to back effective control over North Korea using the COVID pandemic to do so. And, at the same time being completely non-transparent about what happened there, the number of deaths. You'll recall a long time during the COVID pandemic that North Korea claimed that they had no COVID cases, which no one really believed. North Korea is a case study of how to use pandemic restrictions to violate rights. And the view is that the United States, South Korea, and other countries, Japan, need to be placing human rights issues at the center of its engagement with North Korea. Too often, what we've seen is a focus on the nuclear proliferation or the proliferation of missile technology means that human rights issues get pushed off the table as if they're somehow not connected. But the is the repression of the North Korean people. It is their fear of their government that freezes them in place and makes it impossible for them to resist or against a massive diversion of resources by the North Korean government to weapons of mass destruction. So human rights issues and these other issues of nuclear proliferation and missile technology, they're all up together. And it can't be separated. And unfortunately, it has been. And what we're hoping is that with the President Yoon's administration in South Korea, we will see a change in policy that will recognize that there has to be an active effort on human rights issues, even if North Korea bangs the table and say you can't talk about these things. These issues need to be talked about. They can't be pushed aside. And that is what changed. There needs to be a global coalition that recognizes what North Korea has done, which is the crimes against humanity and incredible abuses against people, is an affront to the international community. It's an affront to the UN system of international human rights protection, and it must stop. And that has to be advertised, not just pushed aside. We have questions from... Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
Saya ingin menanyakan kepada Mas Andreas Arsono. Iya, tadi beberapa poin sudah disebutkan di dalam report untuk Indonesia. Ada beberapa isu yang disoroti seperti KUHP, juga disabilitas, dan anak, dan juga Papua. Kita sudah memasuki tahun politik hingga 2024. Yang ingin saya tanyakan, apakah ada kekhawatiran isu-isu yang diangkat dalam report ini akan dengan konstelasi politik di tahun 2024, dan apakah ada langkah-langkah yang bisa diambil dari sekarang untuk mencegah hal tersebut terjadi? Terima kasih.
Kita ini melakukan pemilihan umum untuk mencari pemimpin baru. Mungkin menggantikan pemimpin yang lama atau mungkin mempertahankan pemimpin yang lama. Baik itu pada aras nasional, provinsi maupun kabupaten kota. Jadi itu tujuan demokrasi. Pergantian pemimpin dengan cara yang damai. Ya. Kalau tidak menggunakan demokrasi, setiap kali terjadi perubahan pemimpin, itu bisa berdarah-darah. Kita tahu 65 pergantian dari Soekarno ke Soeharto, 1 juta orang mati. Tahun 98 pergantian dari Soeharto ke Presiden Habibie, belakangan ke Presiden Abdurrahman Wahid, 90.000 orang mati. Nah, jadi itu substansi dari pemilihan umum. Nah, sekarang banyak orang di Indonesia itu takut bila terjadi pemilihan umum. Kenapa? Karena memakai sentimen-sentimen agama, sentimen-sentimen suku, ya, buat menggalang suara. Saya kira itu cara yang salah. Saya kira politisi kita harus berani untuk beradu soal mereka menjadi pemimpin yang lebih baik, memperbaiki keadaan, mungkin dengan anggaran, mungkin dengan program-program, dan seterusnya, agar demokrasi di Indonesia makin bermutu. Menurut saya tidak boleh, ya, tidak perlu dilarang, tetapi tidak elok buat politisi berkampanye dengan menggunakan kebencian. Tidak elok. Saya harap tahun politik ini tidak ada satupun politikus dari Aceh sampai Papua, dari Myanmar sampai Rote menggunakan kebencian buat mendapatkan suara. Karena itu akan merusak, menciderai demokrasi. Baik itu terhadap minoritas agama, minoritas gender, minoritas seksualitas, disabilitas, dan seterusnya. Tidak boleh. Saya selalu ingat sebuah kata yang bikin saya trauma itu. Kata itu dalam bahasa Madura artinya mateh kebih. Mateh kebih. Jadi pada tahun 99 sampai tahun 2001, ketika banyak orang Madura dibunuh, sebagian saya kenal, mereka selalu bilang dalam bahasa Madura tentunya, Mas Andreas, semua mati. Saudara saya semua mati. Kenapa? Karena waktu itu terjadi pergantian pemimpin dari gubernur sebelumnya menjadi gubernur berikutnya atau bupati dan wali kota. Berbahaya sekali menggunakan sentimen-sentimen kebencian ya di dalam pergantian pemimpin. Kita tidak boleh melakukan itu. Tapi saya tahu bahwa dilarang juga tidak mungkin ada kebebasan berekspresi yang secara ideal harusnya tidak membatasi berbagai macam sentimen ini ya di Indonesia. No. Tetapi ketika sudah ada kata bunuh, bakar, binasa, musnahkan, dan seterusnya, saya kira harus ada upaya-upaya yang serius buat menghindari diri kita menggunakan kata-kata yang kekerasan. Begitu, terima kasih.
Thank you. We're getting down to it. Others are still coming, so we'll address a few more we close. Two questions on Wiseman, New Zealand. Both of these, I think, are for Lane. First is the Australian Prime Minister is currently in Papua New Guinea. Signs that he will prolong the policy of refusing to let people arriving illegally by boat from settling in Australia. This comes as dozens of people are now in points of health. What does Watch say of his continued refusal to take them? Another more question about Guinea. Given the election in last year, Human Rights Watch Papua New Guinea government.
Yeah, policy processing implemented over well now is staying Australia's international rights reputation. I mean, it has placed people miserable on remote islands reason that people are not in Australia, and it has had impacts on the mental of people that have been subjected to those cruel conditions. And I've seen it myself, visited manifest. I find it unacceptable that there are still today, years later, who are seeing their families who have missed out on work opportunity, study opportunity. There's 100 people in Papua New Guinea. Australian government deal with this. To bring Australia, they end up being. We know they may end up